When the iron wolves set their sights on Maya and Zara, they thought they were hunting easy prey. But the predators become the prey when they mess with two sisters trained to fight in the shadows. And this town's about to learn who really runs the pack. The small town of Millhaven was like something out of a postcard. Narrow streets lined with white picket fences, kids riding their bikes under a golden sun, and the smell of fresh-baked pies drifting from kitchen windows. But underneath this serene image lay a darker truth. A gang known as the Iron Wolves had claimed Millhaven as their territory. Their power wasn't in numbers, it was in fear. They preyed on anyone who didn't look, act, or speak like they belonged. Immigrants, travelers, and anyone who wasn't white were their targets. Most of the townsfolk pretended not to notice, turning their heads away from the wolves' antics. Some quietly agreed with the wolves' hateful ideas. Others were too scared to speak up. The wolves liked it that way. On a bright summer day, two figures stepped off the bus at Millhaven's main station. Twin sisters Maya and Zara. The first thing anyone noticed was how striking they were. Ebony skin that seemed to glow under the sun, long braids tied back neatly, and sharp, unflinching eyes that gave the impression they saw straight into your soul. The sisters were 19, but the way they carried themselves, their upright posture, the confident set of their jaws, made them seem much older. The girls were in town to visit their grandmother, Miss Eleanor, who lived in a little blue house at the edge of town. She had been feeling unwell lately, and her granddaughters had decided to stay for a few weeks to help her out. What no one in Millhaven could have guessed was that these two sisters weren't ordinary teenagers. Maya and Zara were soldiers, elite operatives in a top-secret branch of the military known as Shadow Force. They had been recruited at 16, trained in martial arts, advanced weaponry, strategy, and psychological warfare. They could disarm an enemy twice their size, hack into secured systems, and disappear into thin air when the situation called for it. But today, they were just two young women carrying groceries for their grandma, or so it seemed. The sisters didn't need long to sense that something was off in Millhaven. As they walked through the quiet streets, heading toward the grocery store, they noticed how people stared. Some looked curious. Others looked annoyed. A few looked openly hostile. "Zara," Maya said, her voice low, "you seeing this?" "Yeah," Zara replied, scanning the street casually. "Feels like they've never seen black people before. Or they've seen too much," Maya muttered. She had a sharp sense for danger, and it was screaming at her now. They entered the grocery store, hoping to brush off the weird energy. Inside, the air was cool, and the faint hum of a freezer buzzed in the background. The sisters moved efficiently through the aisles, grabbing what they needed: vegetables, bread, some spices their grandmother liked. But soon, they noticed they weren't alone. A group of 5 people lingered near the back of the store, pretending to browse but keeping their eyes locked on Maya and Zara. Zara nudged her sister. "We've got company." "I see them," Maya replied. She placed a bag of flour in the basket, keeping her voice calm. "What do you think? Locals?" "No," Zara said, glancing over her shoulder. "Locals wouldn't stare this hard. These guys are wolves. The Iron Wolves." The group consisted of 3 men and 2 women. Their leader was easy to spot: Troy, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a beard that looked more like an unkempt bramble. He had a cocky smirk and a predatory gleam in his eye. "Looks like we got some fresh meat," Troy said, just loud enough for his crew to laugh, but quiet enough to pretend it wasn't a threat. Maya and Zara didn't react. They didn't flinch or turn to look. Instead, they kept shopping. The wolves followed. At the checkout counter, the sisters placed their items on the conveyor belt. Troy and his crew stood a few feet away, snickering and whispering. As the clerk rang up the items, Troy took a step closer. "Hey, you two," he called out. His voice was loud, obnoxious, and full of false cheer. "You new in town?" Maya turned slowly, meeting his gaze. Her expression was unreadable. "We're visiting family," she said simply. Well, ain't that nice? Troy said, his smirk widening. But you might want to be careful. Not everyone around here is friendly to strangers. We'll keep that in mind, Zara said coolly. She paid for the groceries, and the sisters walked toward the exit. Hey, I'm talking to you, Troy yelled. He grabbed the edge of their shopping cart, jerking it back. The sisters stopped. Zara's grip tightened on the cart handle, but Maya held up a hand, signaling her to stand down. Is there a problem? Maya asked, her voice calm but firm. Troy leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. Yeah, there's a problem. This is our town, and we don't like outsiders who don't know their place. Maya didn't blink. Good to know. Zara tugged the cart free, and the sisters walked out of the store without another word. Troy's laughter followed them into the parking lot. You think you can just walk away? This isn't over. As they loaded the groceries into their car, Zara muttered under her breath, I hate guys like him. Don't let it get to you, Maya said, but her tone was sharp. They'll make their move soon enough. Let's hope they do, Zara replied with a smirk. The wolves thought they were predators. They didn't realize they had just picked a fight with the wrong prey. The grocery store was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that only deepened tension. Maya could feel it immediately, the prickling sensation of being watched. It wasn't just casual curiosity or small-town nosiness. It was the predatory kind of attention that she and Zara had encountered too many times in their line of work. We've got eyes on us, Maya murmured, picking up a carton of milk. She held it like she was examining the expiration date, but her sharp eyes were scanning the aisles. I see them, Zara replied, casually grabbing a loaf of bread from a nearby shelf. Her tone was light, but her body was coiled, ready. 5 of them. Flanking us. Maya turned the milk over, pretending to read the label. 3 men, 2 women. The big guy in the leather jacket is the leader. What's his move? Intimidation, Zara said, her voice steady. Classic pack mentality. They'll test us first. Let's not escalate, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. She placed the milk in the cart and pushed it forward, Zara falling in step beside her. The wolves didn't bother with subtlety. They moved in closer, pretending to browse the shelves, but never taking their eyes off the twins. The leader, Troy, sauntered toward the checkout lane, cutting them off. Let's play it cool, Maya repeated under her breath, keeping her posture relaxed. But Troy had no interest in keeping things cool. He stepped directly into their path, blocking the way to the cashier. Well, he drawled, his voice thick with mockery. Look who wandered into the wrong town. Maya stopped the cart and looked up at him, her face blank. She didn't rise to the bait. Excuse us, she said simply, stepping to the side. But Troy wasn't done. With a quick shove, he pushed the cart backward, knocking it over and scattering the contents onto the floor. He loomed over the spilled groceries, smirking. Where do you think you're going? He snarled, his voice louder now, drawing the attention of the few other customers in the store. Zara's hand twitched. It would have been so easy to drop him right then. And there, a single strike to the throat, a sharp twist of his arm. But Maya shook her head subtly. Not here. Not yet. Let's go, Maya said, her voice calm but edged with warning. The twins stepped around Troy, leaving the spilled groceries behind. His laughter followed them. You think you can just walk away? Troy shouted as they headed for the exit. His voice echoed through the store, ugly and loud. This is our town. Maya and Zara didn't react. They didn't flinch or turn around. They walked out of the store, their steps measured, their breathing steady. The moment they were outside, Zara muttered, You know they're going to come after us, right? Maya's lips curved into a faint smirk. Let them. They walked down the street, unbothered by the curious glances from the townsfolk. In the distance, they could hear the rumble of an engine as Troy and his crew piled into a truck, laughing and shouting as they revved the engine. 3 minutes, Zara estimated as they crossed the street toward their grandmother's house. That's how long it'll take them to follow us. 2 minutes, Maya corrected. Sure enough, as they turned the corner onto a quieter street, the truck screeched around the bend behind them, its headlights glaring in the twilight. Showtime, Zara said, her tone almost amused. Not yet, Maya replied, her voice steady. Let them think they've won. The truck slowed, creeping behind them as Troy shouted from the driver's seat. Hey, we're not done with you yet. Maya glanced at Zara. Let's lead them somewhere quiet. Zara nodded. The alley by the old factory, 2 blocks. The sisters quickened their pace just slightly, enough to lure the wolves into following. The truck trailed behind, the gang laughing and hollering, unaware they were being led into a trap. Zara's smile widened as they approached the alley. They have no idea who they're messing with, do they? Not a clue, Maya replied, her tone cold. The alley was dark and narrow, flanked by tall, crumbling walls. As the twins stepped into the shadows, the truck pulled to a stop, and the wolves jumped out, eager for a fight. All right, girls, Troy sneered, cracking his knuckles. Time to teach you a lesson. Maya turned slowly, her face calm and unreadable. You're right, she said quietly. It's time for a lesson. Zara stepped up beside her, her smile sharp as a blade. But it's not the one you're expecting. The wolves didn't understand what was happening. At least, not yet. But they would. Inside the small blue house at the corner of Willow Street, Maya and Zara sat in silence by the window, their sharp eyes scanning the shadows outside. The wolves weren't subtle. They weren't strategists. They were thugs who relied on brute force and numbers to intimidate. But that was their weakness. 3 cars, Zara whispered, her voice low but clear. She was crouched behind the curtain, her gaze fixed on the headlights creeping down the street. 8 of them. Guns, bats, maybe a crowbar. They're cocky, though. Loud. Maya sat cross-legged on the floor, her posture unnervingly calm. Sloppy, she murmured. Her tone was cold, detached. She had a way of speaking that made even the most dangerous situations feel like minor inconveniences. Zara grinned faintly. They don't know what's coming, do they? Maya stood, stretching her arms lazily. No, but they will. She glanced around the room, checking their preparations. They had turned off every light in the house, plunging it into darkness. Every window was locked, every entrance accounted for. We end this tonight. The wolves arrived in a cacophony of revving engines and slamming doors. They piled out of their cars, their laughter echoing in the stillness of the neighborhood. Troy stood at the forefront, a crowbar slung over his shoulder. He was grinning, but his eyes burned with anger. Come on up, ladies, he bellowed, his voice dripping with mockery. We just want to have a little chat. Behind him, the other wolves spread out, their weapons glinting under the pale moonlight. They tore through the front gate, sending the old wooden slats crashing to the ground. Inside the house, Maya and Zara moved like shadows. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Years of training had taught them how to communicate without words. A glance, a nod, a hand signal. Each movement was precise, deliberate. Ready? Zara mouthed, her fingers tightening around the handle of a small baton she had retrieved from her bag. Maya's lips curved into a faint smirk. She gave a single nod. The wolves kicked down the front door with a loud crash, their laughter turning into jeers as they flooded into the house. But the moment they stepped inside, their confidence faltered. The lights had been cut. The air was thick and oppressive, the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Where the hell are they? Muttered one of the men, a scrawny figure holding a baseball bat. Spread out, Troy ordered, his voice gruff but tinged with unease. Find them. The wolves fanned out, their heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. But the house seemed to swallow the sound, turning it into something distant and hollow. That's when it started. A sharp whistle pierced the silence, coming from somewhere upstairs. One of the men froze, his eyes darting around. What was that? Before he could react, Zara struck. She dropped from the staircase like a silent predator, her baton cracking against his wrist. He cried out, his back clattering to the floor. She twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. A quick chop to the side of his neck, and he slumped unconscious. The noise drew another wolf, a woman holding a knife. "Over here," she yelled, but as she rounded the corner, Maya was waiting. With one swift motion, Maya disarmed her, grabbing her wrist and slamming it against the wall. The knife clattered to the floor. Before the woman could react, Maya's foot swept her legs out from under her, sending her crashing to the ground. "Two down," Zara murmured, stepping into the hallway. "Six to go," Maya replied. The remaining wolves were panicking now. They shouted to each other, their voices growing louder, more frantic. "Where are they?" one of them yelled. The twins moved like ghosts, striking from the shadows and vanishing before anyone could react. A burly man with a shotgun barely had time to raise his weapon before Zara tackled him, her knee driving into his ribs. Maya took down another with a perfectly timed roundhouse kick, sending him sprawling into a stack of chairs. It wasn't long before only Troy remained. He stood in the middle of the living room, panting heavily, his crowbar gripped tightly in both hands. Around him lay the remnants of his gang, some unconscious, others groaning in pain. "Cowards!" he roared, turning in circles, trying to spot the twins in the darkness. "Come out and face me." From the shadows, a voice answered. Calm, cold, unshaken. "You wanted our attention." Maya stepped into the moonlight streaming through a broken window. Her expression was unreadable, her posture relaxed, as if she were having a casual conversation. "Now you have it." Troy's grip tightened on the crowbar. "You think you're tough, huh?" He spat, taking a step toward her. Zara appeared behind him, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "No, we know we're tough." Troy spun around, but before he could react, Zara disarmed him with a precise kick to his wrist. The crowbar clattered to the floor. He lunged for it, but Maya intercepted him, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. He yelled in pain, struggling against her iron grip. "Don't worry," Maya said, her voice low and steady. "This isn't over yet." Zara crouched in front of him, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. "But for you, it's the beginning of the end." Troy lunged at Maya with all the strength he could muster, his fists swinging wildly. But to someone like Maya, calm, precise, and trained in combat, it was as predictable as a summer storm. She sidestepped him with ease, her movements fluid, and Troy's momentum carried him straight into the wall. He grunted in frustration, scrambling to his feet. Sweat dripped down his forehead, and the fury in his eyes was now mixed with something else. Fear. Zara's voice rang out from behind him, cold and sharp. "Do you even know who you're messing with?" Troy spun around to face her, chest heaving. "You think you're so tough, huh?" He spat, his bravado cracking as he backed away from the twins, his hands trembling at his sides. "This is our town." "Not anymore," Maya said, her tone cutting through the room like a blade. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed something at his feet. It clattered against the floor, a small black flash drive, its tiny red indicator light blinking faintly. Troy stared at it, confused. "What's this?" he demanded, his voice faltering. "Evidence," Zara said, folding her arms across her chest. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made Troy take a step back. "Of everything you and your little gang have done. Assaults, vandalism, intimidation, drug deals, all of it." Troy's face went pale. His bravado crumbled as he stared at the drive. You're lying," he stammered, shaking his head. "You can't prove anything." "Am I?" Maya asked, her eyebrow arched. She took a step closer, her calm demeanor making her presence even more intimidating. You've already been sent to the authorities. Every single transaction, every violent act, every time you thought you could get away with terrorizing people, it's all there. By morning, your entire gang will be behind bars." "No, no way," Troy muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked around the room as if searching for an escape, for someone to back him up. But the rest of the wolves were either unconscious or too incapacitated to help. "You think we just walked into this town blind?" Zara asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've been watching you for weeks, tracking your moves. Every accident, every deal, every person you hurt. It's over, Troy." Panic set in. Realizing he was outmatched, Troy turned and bolted toward the door. He didn't care where he was going. He just needed to get away. But Zara was faster. With a smooth motion, she stepped into his path and swept her leg out, catching his ankle. Troy's world tilted, and he hit the ground hard. The wind knocked out of him. Before he could scramble to his feet, Zara planted a boot on his chest, pinning him down. She leaned in close, her face inches from his, and her voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "You made this personal. Big mistake." Troy squirmed, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. "You can't do this," he stuttered. "You can't just." Maya crouched beside him, her expression neutral but her eyes blazing. "Oh, we can," she said quietly. "And we just did." The sound of distant sirens pierced the night air, growing louder by the second. "Looks like your ride's here," Zara said, stepping back and letting Troy struggle to his knees. She watched him with a faint smirk as red and blue lights flickered in the distance. Troy's shoulders slumped in defeat. He knew it was over. The wolves were finished. As the police cars screeched to a halt outside, Maya and Zara stepped back into the shadows. They moved with practiced ease, disappearing into the darkness before the officers entered the house. Troy sat on the floor, his head hanging low, as the officers swarmed in, guns drawn. One of them approached him, pulling him to his feet and slapping cuffs onto his wrists. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, but Troy barely heard the words. His mind was spinning, replaying the events of the night over and over. He thought he was the hunter. He thought this was his town. He thought wrong. There was a lightness in the air, a collective sense of relief that seemed to seep into every corner of the town. For the first time in years, the streets felt safe. The iron wolves were gone, arrested in the dead of night by a SWAT team that arrived with precision and purpose. The gang's crimes, extortion, drug trafficking, assault, had been meticulously documented on a flash drive anonymously delivered to law enforcement. It was a smoking gun, impossible to ignore. By morning, the wolves' cars were gone from the streets. Their graffiti tags, those ugly, menacing symbols that marked their territory, felt like relics of a bad dream. The wolves' reign of terror had ended overnight, and Millhaven was free. In the center of town, a crowd gathered near the bulletin board outside the mayor's office. The news of the arrests had been posted, and people were reading it with a mix of disbelief and joy. "Did you hear? They found evidence of everything, every crime they've committed," one woman said, her voice trembling with excitement. "And they arrested all of them." Another asked, still in shock. "Every last one," the first woman replied. "Troy, too. Can you believe it? That monster finally got what he deserved." For years, the people of Millhaven had lived under the wolves' shadow. Some had suffered directly at their hands. Others had watched helplessly, too afraid to stand up. But now, there was hope. The town was theirs again. At the edge of town, in the little blue house on Willow Street, Maya and Zara were busy packing their things. "You think they'll be okay?" Zara asked, folding the shirt and placing it neatly into her bag. "They'll be fine," Maya replied, zipping up her duffel. They just needed a push in the right direction. Zara looked out the window at the quiet street. A few children were playing on the sidewalk, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "Still," she said, her tone softer now, "it feels good. knowing we made a difference. Maya gave her sister a small smile. It does, but this was never about us. The twins moved with practiced efficiency, their movements as synchronized as a well-rehearsed dance. Within minutes, their bags were packed, and the house was spotless. They left a note for their grandmother, who was still sleeping peacefully upstairs. By the time the townsfolk came knocking on the door to thank them, Maya and Zara were already gone. They didn't leave behind names or explanations, just an empty house and the faint memory of two confident young women who had come and gone like a summer storm. Just finally, the iron wolves are gone, but the legend of two fearless sisters lives on. Maya and Zara didn't ask for recognition. They came, they fought, and they vanished like shadows. If this story moved you, hit like, share it with someone who needs a dose of justice, and subscribe for more unforgettable tales. See you in the next video. You can endeavor to watch the next inspiring videos on the description below. Thanks.